Okay. We're here with Charles Johnson at the first ABR reading of spring 2010. Thank him for coming again and just ask a few questions about him, or questions to him about craft and teaching and creative writing. So let's talk about this. You just recently retired.
Yes.
From the University of Washington, a long time teaching there. What is it, and you spoke a little bit today about just like what you learned from journalism, but what is it that you think that budding writers should probably learn most early on in their apprenticeship?
I think the first thing a young writer should ask himself or herself is, what can I contribute to American literature? I really believe that. I mean, the love of writing is great. I mean, we all love to do certain things, but I think they should ask themselves the hard question of what void can I fill, if there is one. Now, what does that mean? That means you must be a reader. You need to read contemporary fiction and have an idea of what your predecessors have done in the history of American literature. And we're fortunate because American history is brief compared to the older countries and nations of Europe, where you've got, can you imagine trying to make contribution to Italian or Greek? You got thousands of years of documents that you need to take a look at. But if you're an American, you have about 200. And that was one of the questions I asked myself as a writer. Well, okay, what is it that I could possibly bring that I'm interested in to Black American literature, and by virtue of that, American literature, that I don't see being done? And I understood, in my case, coming out of philosophy, that there was a philosophical kind of novel and story that I could write. I think the first thing a writer should do is say, okay, why am I doing this?
Right.
You know, what is my aim? Yeah, that's where I'd start.
And what about your contribution? I mean, do you look back at it now and see that it has changed from when you first conceived it?
Well, I think as you ask yourself the question, what is it that I can bring, you discover other doors opening up. So in certain cases, I was interested in the question of the self in Oxfording Tale. But then I began to become interested in the interface with the East and the West, and particularly in terms of Buddhism. And now, at this point in my life, I'm very interested in what's happening in 21st century science and technology, and how that could possibly influence our lives in this century.
Well, that's an interesting response, because I think that one of the things that has always struck me about your work is that it is in and of itself sort of always modifying, changing. There's a core to it.
Oh yeah, I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so. But and I think there is, but that it's not necessarily moving forward with fashion, but moving forward after what's interesting you at the time and what you're pursuing.
Oh, I think so. I'm not real big on fashion. That is not me. Yeah, I kind of go the other direction.
Yeah,
I think as a writer.
That's right. That's good. That's good. So, but we asked you also a few months back in ABR to contribute to the Fiction's Future issue, and you did.
I did.
Yeah,
I did.
Yeah.
I forgot what I did.
And you did. You spoke very eloquently about that the technologies will change, blah blah blah, but that essentially that story is something which is has endured and will continue to endure. Do you have any? Do you think maybe you could talk a little bit more about maybe the shape of that endurance? How, because with technological advance, I mean, certainly that's going to change perhaps how we receive it, even maybe how we create it. But what do you think? I mean, what is the future of stories?
Well, I mean, you look at technology, I think it's all important. We have new ways to deliver the product, but this is deep. We say, well, why story? Why is story so important to us? I think the reason for this, if I'm not mistaken, is that we structure our experience in terms of narrative. We consciously impose narrative structures over what happens to us, whether we mean a beginning for something and an end, for a story. That's very artificial. You're looking at a stream of events and experiences, and you're saying, well, this is literally where it begins.
Right.
You know, and this is the end, the whole idea of rising conflict resolution. That's a very artificial structure, but even so, when you're younger and you're in college and you say, I'm going to study this area, and then I'm going to finish the requirements for this degree, and then I'm going to be hired in this field, and then I'm going to get this. I mean, you're basically telling yourself a story and imposing a temporal structure on it, and that is not necessarily the way life works,
Right.
particularly from a Buddhist perspective. Those things that we impose. So narrative is fundamental to the way consciousness operates in most of our circumstances. We tell stories about ourselves. That is, I don't think it's ever going to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I like. We heard a little bit from Middle Passage today, but I have to admit to my main preference, which is Sorcerer's Apprentice. I think.
Oh, thank you.
Those are,
Look at those.
you know, like just like knockout short stories,
Well,
and I remember
those are-
encountering
Oh.
them first, but still, just like, because you think about, like, well, for one, today, how few collections of stories come out, you know, are published these days, and now the kind of main sort of marketing tool is to market them as a novel in stories rather than just
Oh,
8 or
yeah.
9 stories.
Yeah.
And I just go back to that because really it's a kind of formal experiment. And that there's parodies, there's a second person story.
Oh, in this case, yeah.
Fabulistic stories.
Just moving around things aesthetically.
Yeah.
There's, I hope, a good deal of diversity.
Yeah.
Well, you know, one of the curious things is I think there was a lot this last year of story collections.
True.
That we looked at, say, as for the National Book Awards. Maybe 300 titles, and I would say a third maybe might have been story collections. Some by famous authors,
Right.
some by new writers. Bonnie Jo Campbell's American Salvage,
Right.
which we shortlisted
Right.
for the
Yeah, and
National
it was a
Book
small, and
Award.
it was a small press book.
There's
Was
a
it
small.
Wayne State?
That's right, Wayne State.
University.
And you also had Daniel Muineeden's In Other Rooms, Other Wonders, which is all the stories are set in Pakistan. But they're powerful and universal stories in terms of the human heart in conflict with itself. So there's a good deal of short fiction. I just don't know if the public is as aware
Right.
as it might be of all the richness that's out there in that genre.
Well, what continues to attract you to the short story form?
I think I like, you know, if I do a novel, like I said, I'm working on it for 5 or 6 years, I really can't branch off
Right.
into anything not within the parameters of the, you know, aesthetically and artistically and intellectually of that novel. And I find myself interested in all kinds of things that I want to pursue. And the shorter form allows me to do that. I think it's a tighter form than a novel. You can have a novel that has what the French call remplissage, which is padding. Okay,
Right.
you can have a novel that commits various sins, but conceals those sins because of the sheer length
Right.
of the material. Then the modern short story, beginning probably with Poe in the 19th century, is tight, like an equation. And it needs to know its business, no waste, not one wasted sentence or paragraph. It has to be in control of tone, no remplissage. It's almost like a poem.
Right.
And so I like the rigor of the short story. I believe novels can have the same rigor. But again, you know, I've seen a lot of stories that just don't. Novels that basically, you know, you got certain virtues, but there's no story. You know, it's concealing that because the language may be beautiful,
Right.
or whatever the case might be, poetic prose. But I'm a story guy.
Right.
And story for me is more important than anything else, and the short story has to have that as its business.
Right.
You know, up front usually.
What about just where parody fits in for you? I mean, is it something that, I mean, because you talked about, you know, you have to be a reader in order to be a good writer, to understand what your contribution might be. But take for example Middle Passage, which could be conceivably read as perhaps either an homage to that kind of adventure yarn. Like I know that you've talked about its earlier incarnation was Rutherford's Travels,
Yeah.
like Gulliver's Travels. Captain Falcon is sort of drawn from
That's right.
Wolf, the character in the Sea Wolf.
Oh, there's
Yeah.
the Wolf Larson. There's some elements
Right.
of that
Mm-hmm.
because those stories precede
Right.
this one, and I happen to be very conscious of my predecessors.
Right.
So there's you got this intellectual captain, so you naturally think, oh, okay, that's like Wolf Larson,
Right.
Captain Falcon,
Right.
or shoot, you might think of Ahab too,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily an intellectual captain, but kind of
Monomaniacal.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. So now is that parody or is that homage?
That's what. Yeah. That's our question for the day.
I think it's homage.
You see?
I think it's homage.
Right.
Shoot, look, you look at the Al Musari, the slaves.
Mm-hmm.
They're named after the blacks on that ship in Melville's short story.
Right.
Benito Cerrito.
Yeah, Benito Cerrito.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And
The same name.
Delano is the
Yeah,
captain.
exactly.
Yeah, but Benito Cerrito.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's good. I was teaching. I taught Melville in the 19th century class last year, and I had teaching Middle Passage to open up the 20th century
Oh, cool.
class,
Yeah.
just to coincide with your visit, but also because it has that nice little, for the students who are taking both, they're able to say like, I remember something. I remember something.
Excellent.
Okay. So, but I guess this is then just maybe to kind of wrap things up. I mean, again, besides we're just so grateful to have you here. But probably don't want to talk about what you're working on now, or do you? Do you feel, is that something, do you feel superstitious about that at all? Talking.
I
about
don't
what
really
you're
feel
working on
superstitious. I mean, I'm working on a lot of things at the moment. It's a full plate.
Right.
I kind of devoted the last year of my teaching to just teaching.
now? Wow.
I wanted that 33rd year to
Mhm.
bring as much of the same energy to it that I did my first year in 1976, 77. So, I just devoted myself to my graduate class, my undergraduate class, and then last spring to working with our graduate students on their MFA theses, of which there were 900 pages that had to be read for 5 students, 3 of them writing novels and 2 of them story collections, right?
Man.
And then the summer hit, and I was a judge. I chaired the fiction judges,
Right.
and then I also served on the 3-person Pulitzer nominating committee, which we just finished with our citations for before New Year's Day.
Mhm.
It was that week.
Right.
So this is my first chance, really now in retirement, to turn to a number of projects that I've agreed to do, and I've agreed to do quite a few, because they're of interest to me. Short fiction, novels, collaborating on a novel with my friend Stephen Barnes. There'll be a sci-fi novel, because that's his genre. That's an area I want to explore more.
Mhm.
The possibilities
Mhm.
of speculative fiction, because it's so hand in glove with philosophy.
Okay.
So hand in glove. It's almost the same thing.
And you're-
Philosophical fiction.
And you're more comfortable with the term speculative fiction, rather, because I mean, sci-fi carries a sort of like genre-ish.
How do you?
Taint.
How do you genres? Did you say taint?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you mean taint?
I mean, just in the sense that, well, I mean, in the MFA world, that students don't write science fiction.
Why
Generally.
not? Because it's too pop.
Because it's it's
Not seen as
not
literary?
art. Yeah.
Well, what do you do? Samuel Delaney.
That's true. And
My colleague Joanna,
and
former colleague Joanna Russ.
Stanislaw Lem and
Oh,
a
Stanislaw
number
Lem.
of
Oh my
people.
God, this
Yeah.
is the imagination is
Mhm.
just. You see, that's the problem. If you want to talk about it with
Yeah.
MFA programs,
Good.
because there's a thing we call the MFA story,
Right.
and it's a particular kind of story. It doesn't offend anybody in the room. Everybody in the room's looking at it, and yet at the same time, it doesn't get anybody in the room really excited.
Right.
But it's kind of like middle zone,
Mhm.
and it's publishable, but it's not risky. So I used to always ask the question: if in our workshops, what would happen if one day Dostoevsky, young Dostoevsky, showed up, or a young Poe?
Mhm.
I mean, would they be able to take the workshop process?
Mhm.
I don't think they'd last.
Mm.
I don't think they'd last. It's a little bit too much sometimes like committee work.
Right.
You're listening to all these comments, and you got to make a decision as
Yeah.
a student. Which ones do I go with?
Mhm.
It's extremely important because you're developing your own vision. You're not just trying to write a publishable story. You're developing, one hopes, a unique vision that you're bringing to American literature.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's where we're starting.
Okay.
That unique vision. So
Yeah.
thank you.